During World War II, more than 7 million Ukrainians were mobilized into the ranks of the Soviet army. It means that every sixth soldier of the Soviet army was a native of Ukraine. However, the Ukrainians fought in the ranks of Soviet troops as well as in foreign armies. The so-called geography of participation of Ukrainians in the battles of World War II is eloquently described by writer and publicist Miroslav Nebeluk, who immigrated to France in 1937. Ukrainians massively took part in the gigantic battle of the last war. Take a walk through the cemeteries of the fallen in Normandy and look at the victims of the great Allied landing troops on the coast of France. There you will find so many Ukrainian surnames on the military crosses that you will be ashamed of the whole so-called cultural world that knows little about Ukraine. Although Ukrainian blood was shed under English, American and other flags for strong and human ideals, the participation of Ukrainians is hushed up. And the good and the great, like Churchill, remembering every boat sunk by the Germans, they will never remember that Ukrainian blood was shed at Monte Cassino in the Norwegian town of Narvik in the French Avranches and Vulgatate, and who will say that in Dieppe, Ukrainians accounted for 3 times the percentage of Canadian military units, and who has ever heard that the Canadian battalion which defended Hong Kong against the Japanese in December 1941, the Ukrainians made up a certain percentage of the soldiers, which is 4 times higher than the percentage they account for in the population of Canada, and who will count the blood of Ukrainians shed in the marshlands of the Dutch Maastricht. For Ukrainians who served in the Polish army, World War II began on September 1, 1939, after Germany's invasion of Poland. There were 110,000 Ukrainians in the ranks of the Polish army at that time. They served almost in all divisions of the troops, although the largest percentage was in infantry and cavalry units. Several dozen veterans of the Ukrainian armies of 1917-1920 were in the Polish service. These same officers defended Poland in 1939. They signed agreements on a contract service in the Polish army and even graduated from the Academy of the General Staff of Poland. Over 100 officers of the former UPR army were contract soldiers in the Polish army. And when World War II began in 1939, all these soldiers who served in the Polish army took part in the German-Polish War. One of the most famous is the military way of Lieutenant Colonel Pavlo Shandruk. In September 1939, he became the chief of staff of the 29th Infantry Brigade, and later, due to the heavy illness of the commander, he actually headed the military unit. He was awarded the Silver Cross of the Order of the Virtuti Militari for the successful cover-up of the retreat of Polish troops under Zamość. Another well-known Ukrainian is Major Mikhailo Pikulski, who served in the 8th Telegraph Battalion and took part in the defense of Warsaw, for which he was awarded the Polish Cross of Merit for bravery. And there are many such examples. During the fighting, Ukrainian soldiers were faithful to the oath and courageously fought against the Nazi invaders. According to scholars, the loss of Ukrainian soldiers in the German-Polish War reached 8,000. A significant number of Ukrainians who were soldiers of the Polish army were captured. According to Polish historian Waldemar Rezmer, there were about 60,000 people in German captivity. In the Soviet captivity, according to him, there were up to 20,000 people. Later, most were shot. The rest faced exile to hard labor camps in the north of the USSR. After the defeat of Poland in 1939, the Ukrainians continued fighting as a part of the Polish armed forces, but under Soviet or British command. After all, since Germany began the war against the USSR, Soviet and British diplomats agreed with the Polish government on emigration, creation of the Polish army, and joint resistance of the Wehrmacht with the Allied forces. Prisoners of war and immigrants were recruited to its ranks. Commander of the army was appointed Polish General Władysław Anders. In units of the new formation, the majority were Belarusians, Jews and Ukrainians. They hated the USSR so much that they willingly dressed in Polish military uniforms. Recruitment into the troops was absolutely on a volunteer basis since the beginning of its formation in August 1941. That is, representatives of national minorities could have joined the army of General Władysław Anders, not only ethnic Poles but also Belarusians, Ukrainians and Jews. This newly formed army was formed on the territory of the Soviet Union but with the help of Western countries. That is, weapons, equipment and food were provided by Western countries. Significant supplies were provided to them. To perform the first task, Anders's army was sent to the Middle East to protect oil fields in March 1942. First, they were sent to Iran and then to Iraq. There was such a necessity because Japan at this time began active fighting in Southeast Asia. The British needed a military formation that could stand to protect the oil fields of Iran, Iraq, etc. A year later, Anders's army was transformed into the 2nd Polish Corps, which was part of the British Army. It fought in Syria, Libya, Egypt, and ended its military paths in Italy, where in early 1944 it earned its greatest claim to fame for the breakthrough of German fortifications near Monte Cassino.
Варто сказати про те, що перший бункер в обороні Монте-Кассіно захопив саме...
It should be noted that the first bunker in the defense of Monte Cassino was captured exactly by Ukrainian Mikhailo Pankovets, a native of the village Bohorilovka, Rivne Oblast. During the Battle of Monte Cassino, the army of General Vladislav Anders lost nearly 1,000 troops. Among them, we can name about 100 Ukrainians who are still buried on the rocky hill of Monte Cassino.
Українців, які нині поховані на Монте-Кассіно.
According to the Ukrainian Institute of National Remembrance, approximately 6,000 Ukrainians were serving in the French army. How did they get there? In the late 1930s, many Ukrainians left Halichina, which was occupied by Poland, in search of work. They grouped around the Ukrainian People's Union, a public organization that dealt with issues of national education of the Ukrainian workers' immigration, in particular, its preservation from Polonization. After Germany's attack on France, conscious Ukrainians expected a desire to fight with arms in hands to defend French territory from invaders. But there were some conflicts. Ukrainians had Polish passports and the French government insisted that they fight under Polish flags. The Ukrainians persistently disagreed with this.
Donc, il y a eu des discussions avec des représentants ukrainiens.
It is necessary to understand that the Ukrainians held a very powerful discussion amongst themselves. It concerned the fact that on one hand they wanted to protect France because it was this country that gave them the opportunity to work, but at the same time they were against doing this under Polish flags.
Et s'engager pour la France, mais sous les drapeaux français.
State officials did not like the corresponding demands of the Ukrainians. Subsequently, some of the most active participants were arrested, the official reason for the refusal to obey the orders of the French government. Another part of the Ukrainians were sent to serve in the Foreign Legion.
Alors, les autres...
This part of the Ukrainians took part in the fighting as part of a Foreign Legion. It should be mentioned that among the Ukrainians there were many dead and wounded. Nevertheless, the Ukrainians, as part of this legion, managed to retain the defensive of the city of Lyon for some time, which, as we remember, was occupied by the Germans. Being in the Foreign Legion, the Ukrainians in May 1940 took part in all the major battles for Flanders under Sedan, over Sanya, Marne, and other towns. On June 2, 1940, Marshal Henry Philippe Pétain, on behalf of the French government, signed the so-called truce with Nazi Germany. In fact, this meant surrender. However, part of the troops, including the Ukrainians, did not lay down their arms, but left Lyon for Marseille to continue fighting with the Nazis. However, near the city of Grenoble, they received an order for demobilization. But before breaking up, the Ukrainians decided to leave the memory of those heroic and sad days for their descendants.
Alors, il se trouve dans une forêt. Et il y a là un grand rocher, et sur ce rocher...
They were there in the forest where there was a huge stone. The Ukrainian military made a trident and wrote their 900 names directly on this stone, and on the other side of the stone they engraved the map of Ukraine.
Et de l'autre côté de ce rocher qui est grand comme cela, ils ont gravé la carte de l'Ukraine.
A modern memorial sign was also made of stone and installed in honor of the Ukrainians who fought in the ranks of the Foreign Legion. This monument can be seen in the memorial complex of the Pioneer municipality. In those distant times after the surrender of France, the Ukrainians began to replenish the ranks of the French resistance movement. There, even separate nation units, namely the Kuryny of Ivan Bohun, Taras Shevchenko, and Lieutenant Yusuf Krukovsky, were created. Krukovsky's detachment as an independent combat unit was included in the Resistance Tour group under the command of Major Legrand from England. As part of this group, Ukrainians took part in all military operations. In particular, they attacked German military transport, which, under assault of the Allied landing troops in Normandy, retreated to the east. The legend of the French resistance movement was the commander of a partisan detachment in northern France, the Ukrainian Vasil Porik. In the summer of 1942, the lieutenant of the Red Army Porik, along with hundreds of prisoners of war, was sent to the Nazi concentration camp in Beaumont. After a successful escape from there, Porik created a partisan detachment. In April 1944, partisans of the detachment of Vasil Porik derailed 2 German trains, killed more than 200 soldiers and officers of the Nazi troops while guarding the Beaumont camp, and released all prisoners. They buried the legendary Lieutenant Basil, as the French called him, in the French minor settlement of Henin-Letard. Vasil Porik is considered a national hero of France. The Ukrainian communities of the American continent also took an active part in World War II. The largest number of Ukrainians was in the armed force of the United States, particularly almost 80,000 people. They fought both against Germany and Japan in the Pacific region, in Small Asia, and in North Africa. They also participated in the landing of Allied troops in Normandy and on the Elbe. Sailorman of the United States fleet Alex Dichenko, U.S. Army Sergeant Nicholas McNaugh, the first Ukrainian graduate of the U.S. Military Academy, Major Theodore Kalakuka, and many other American servicemen of Ukrainian origin were awarded high state awards for the courage shown during World War II battles. The Sergeant Nicholas Oreshko was even awarded the highest military award of the United States, the Medal of Honor, which was conferred upon him personally by U.S. President Harry Truman. A common guy from a family of Ukrainian immigrants, Mikhail Strenk, volunteering for the war, did not even imagine that he would get in pages of textbooks of U.S. history since 1942. He participated in battles along the Pacific Ocean. He was awarded medals for courage and bravery. In particular, he was presented the Medal Bronze Star, the Order Purple Heart, and other military awards. And on February 23, 1945, Michael Strenk installed an American flag over the Japanese island of Iwo Jima, an impregnable fortress that was captured at the cost of hundreds of lives. This photo became a symbol of the victory of the Allies in World War II. A few days later, Mikhail Strenk died in battle, but the memory of him is immortalized in the U.S. Marine Corps Memorial in a suburb of Washington. Another example is that over 45,000 Ukrainians fought in the Canadian Armed Forces under the British Supreme Command. They took part in landing operations in French Dieppe, Italian Sicily, and French Normandy. In addition, they defended Hong Kong against the Japanese, where losses among Ukrainians reached 34% of the total number of deaths. Known are the names of Ukrainian Canadians who bravely fought on the fronts of World War II. These are pilots of the Royal Air Force Peter Dmytruk and Bogdan Panchuk, an officer of the Canadian Women's Army Corps Anna Kropleva, military chaplains Semen Savchuk and Mikhailo Koroshko, and others. Many Ukrainians from Transcarpathia fought against Hitlerite Germany as part of the Czechoslovak military formations. Ukrainians were scattered all over the world. Therefore, during World War II, they not only defended and liberated the native land, but also fought in the armies of various countries against predatory actions. It is not surprising that nowadays one can see in many parts of the world monuments honoring the feats of Ukrainians who gave their lives for peace.